So I just saw the Marvel Studios Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which is actually a sequel of the 2014 and 2017 movies of the same name, which is actually going to show us the aftermath of the events of Avengers Endgame, plus is actually the final movie of the Guardians, as well as James Gunn's final MCU movie before going to DC comic movies, which is all about the Guardians saving one of their own against a villain from Rocket's past, which they are protecting Rocket Raccoon. So now this is going to be an emotional battle for the Guardians, as this is actually going to be emotional as well. So, here is the review of the Guardians' final tour in the movie. So, the movie actually begins with the Guardians of the Galaxy, who have created the base on a rebuild nowhere, where they actually have made that their new home for them. And the fact that they actually have that place since the Christmas special with Kevin Bacon, we actually see them actually settle in their new place. But after the night that they actually settled in, they were attacked by Adam Warlock, who was actually played by Will Palmer, who was actually in the Maze Runner movies, and including Death Cure, which is actually an okay movie, who's a superpower being who's out for revenge, created by his mother and the Empress Aryasha, who's still actually pissed at them for stealing the energy cells. By which the fact that he is actually going to bring Rocket Raccoon to his creator, the High Evolutionary, who's actually played by Shura the Iwochi, in which they actually have an epic fight where we see Adam capture Rocket, and then after the struggle, he free himself, and where he battled Nebula with her new blade. So now, during the fight, we see Rocket was seriously injured, and now leaving the Guardians defenseless and unable to treat his injuries due to the kill switch that was actually invented into his body. So they decided to resolve to travel to the Orgoscope, the headquarters of the High Evolutionary Company, Orgocore, in hopes to find an override code to help Rocket. But we knew how they get over there because the High Evolutionary is so obsessed with retrieving his subject, which is Rocket Raccoon, who was experimented on to become the guardian that we all know. So now we knew how this could actually be trouble. So with the help of the Ravagers and Gamora, not the Gamora who was killed by Thanos to retrieve the Infinity Stone in Infinity War, but the Gamora from the 2014 version movie. So they actually got their help to infiltrate the Orgo Spear by wearing suits, where we knew how they look exactly like part of the Among Us game and the Space Odyssey movie, by which we see how Peter confesses feelings to Gamora about what has happened, in which they actually got their conversation heard by the other members, which is private, and they actually go over there to retrieve Rocket's file. But they were attacked by the guards, barely escaping when Peter remotely activates their they suits jetpacks, in which they were actually convinced that Theo, who's actually the high evolutionary scientist, may have the override code stored into his memories. So they decided to track him down. So they actually headed over to Counter Earth, which, against Gamora's words, who actually bailed him out after the fact that not only called the Guardians a whole situation of what's actually happened made up their separate plans, but when they got over the planet, we see how they're actually, the people are animals, just like the Meeks from One Piece, in which they actually have a whole moment when Drax throw a ball at a girl, not play fighting, where they actually try to escape. But we knew how Aisha and Adam have intercepted a communicator from Gamora via Ravager, which happens to be a communication that Adam killed during the interrogation. So they followed the coordinates to Counter Earth. So now Peter, Nebula, and Groot decided to track down Theo, which of course Peter didn't know how to drive a car since he left Earth back in the first movie, while we knew how they're going to find him to the high evolutionary ship, while Drax and Mantis stays with Gamora and Rocket, knowing how Peter and Groot and actually boarded the high revolutionary ship, leaving Nebula behind to guard them, in which we see how Mantis unwittingly accompanies Drax to the High Evolutionary ship, knowing that they actually have their own plan of how they're going to sell things, by which we see how they've launched a plan where they actually went over with Peter and Groot aboard, who actually was captured, in which the process to actually also destroy Counter Earth, where Gamora stayed with Rocket, but he was actually attacked by a pig warrior sent by the High Evolutionary, who was actually killed when Warlock actually looking for Rocket. But we see how Gamora battles and overpowers him and actually launched the Guardians rocket, where we see Peter and Groot have defeated the High Evolutionary's men successfully and captured Dale, who actually jump off the ship and retrieve his memory before Gamora meet up with them, where we knew Nebula, Mantis, and Drax aboard the ship with a weakened Adam, since that his mother is in danger. But it was a little bit too late to save her when she actually dies. And we see how the Guardians actually saw Rocket's flatline, and they actually was emotional. But we see how in his near-death experience, he met with his childhood friends, Alia, Thruts, and Floor, which of course, who tells him that his time isn't yet to come for him to cross over the afterlife. So we knew how Peter installed the override code and revived him, bringing him back to life. in which we see how Mantis, Nebula, and Drax came across a prison full of imprisoned children of the High Evolutionaries, who actually was experimented on against their will. So, so we knew how they saw how the prisoners are actually being captured, but they were being captured as well and placed into a chamber with a obelisk where we see Mantis was able to persuade it to side with them. And so the creature and the three of them escaped the chamber before reuniting with the Guardians and overpowering the High Illusionaries army, which one of them is actually played by Nathan Fillion, who was actually played Bill Purry in the horror, well, somewhat horror movie Slither, and the 2021 The Suicide Squad, who was also directed by James Gunn, which they actually battled the High Evolutionary. But Cracklin, who was actually played by his brother Sean Gunn, and Cosmo, who actually arrived in Nowhere, where they actually knew that Cosmo connected to the High Evolutionary ship with the other test subjects, but they were actually attacked by a deranged High Evolutionary who would attempt to free them because of the fact that he's actually knew that he won't let them go before being rescued by the Guardians. So the High Evolutionary was left to die on his ship, and the animals was rescued and boarded onto Cracklin's ship. So now, along with most of the Guardians, by which we see Drax was injured, but we see Cosmo couldn't unable to hold the ship together for long for him to board. So Peter was actually escaped barely, began to freeze in space, but he was rescued by Adam Warlock. So now the Guardians, in their current state, have made the decision to disband after returning to Nowhere. So Peter decided to relinquish his role as captain of the Guardians onto Rocket, which he actually decided to leave for Earth to reunite with his grandfather. Then Mantis is on the journey of self-discovery with the creature, and Gamora, who's reunited with the Ravagers and her sister Nebula, and and Drax, who's actually stays in Nowhere to raise the rescued children. And the movie ends with the mid-credit scene of the new Guardians, Rocket, Groot, who is fully grown, Cosmo, Cracklin, Warlock, Pula, and Belch, who actually showed on a new mission where they actually go to. Then on the post-credit scene of Peter reunited with his grandfather again because of the fact that he was gone for so many years. And that's how the movie ends. I really love how this movie is actually incredible, which is a good way to end the trilogy. This actually is amazing, including how this will be James Gunn's final movie in the MCU before going over to the DC comic movies, but this is actually an incredible movie as well. I really love how the Guardians have their final mission together to save Rocket from the villain, the High Evolutionary. So I cannot wait to see what other Marvel movies are going to happen, while I'm also going to watch the DC comic movies as well. So anyway, like this video, subscribe for more, and comment what you think about the movie review and the movie itself. You guys can also follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, and my Facebook page and Twitch. Until then, this is Anime God Renner here saying signing out. Laters, and be safe.